Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I think we have a show for you this evening. I did what I always do, and that is I do a sound test with our guest earlier on. Everything was just fine, and now when we get him on Skype, he's saying hello, hello. That's all we got so far. So we have Bill in the background. Thank you, Bill. He's going to try to work that out. So we're not really getting too far, but we will see how things go. We get this news with Alejandro Rojas for about 15 minutes. So during that time, hopefully we will connect. And anyway, I want to thank everyone that supports the show. Anyone can support the show. All you have to do is go over to podcastufo.com and check it out over there. Also, we have a new blog this week called Rockin' UFOs. That's by Charles Lear, and it's about some rock stars. Not all of them, because a lot of them have had UFO experiences, but some of them are listed there. So go check that out over at podcastufo.com. And our Facebook page, we've got, 23,000 or so people over there. And the reason they're there is because Peggy in Las Vegas is kind enough to post a news story every day on there of one kind or another in relation to UFOs or space, interesting subjects, things like that. And I think it's about ready for me to stop talking and to get Alejandro in. Alejandro, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Well, you might end up doing the whole show with me. I know you got things to do. But anyway, deer in the headlights look. So how you doing? Have you relaxed yet? A little bit?
Not really. A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably look better because I'm not totally freaked out. But it's been kind of crazy. In fact, I am like super busy again because there was the UFO Congress. We took a few days off, and then I sold my house. And it sold way more quickly than I expected.
Oh my goodness.
So I am literally moving out because I have to be out by the end of the week. And in fact, I'm attempting to have everything ready tomorrow. So, yeah, so it's craziness.
Goodness. Wow.
And so why am I moving out of my house and what the heck is going on?
Yeah, I was just about ready to ask that.
The answers to that question may have implications in the UFO field, which will be, I think, for our listeners, very interesting. So I don't have anything to share. Unfortunately, I can't share anything now, and I hate it because I've told this all the time. There's good stuff coming up. But luckily, lately, when I've been told that, it's come true. You know, we've got a lot of amazing things that have been happening, and there's more great stuff in store, and I'll share with you all as soon as I can. But some really exciting stuff on the horizon.
Excellent. Well, usually I know kind of the inside story, and I have to keep it quiet. But I'm part of this. The people on this side that's going, I want to know. So I have an idea, and I'll share that with you. I have an idea.
Oh, okay. Well, either way, you'll be one of the first to know, of course, and your audience often gets to know stuff before my audience, because if I'm too busy to do my show, luckily I'm usually able to still pop on with you. And I have had some people, where are you? Where's your podcast? And, hopefully I'll have it up again soon, and or some bigger, better news for everybody. But so that's what's up with me. Of course, there's lots of UFO news out there. Should we get into that?
I think we should.
Okay. So it's a lot more complicated than what we're reading in the headlines. We're seeing headlines such as UFOs are real. The Navy says UFOs are real, and the Navy UFO videos are real, which is significant, of course. Life Science has a headline here that says UFOs are real and you were never supposed to see them, military official says. There was also a Politico story of a week ago, Navy withholding data on UFO sightings, according to a congressman. So let's break all this down. So what the heck is going on? So here's something that's kind of strange. we've got confirmation, and essentially a Navy representative spoke to or sent a message to John Greenwald of the Black Bolt saying that, yes, those videos, which confirms essentially what Lou Elizondo was telling us, are UAPs. We don't know what they are. We don't think they're Russian. We don't think they're Chinese. They didn't say that explicitly, but that's essentially what they're saying. They're UAPs. They don't know what these things are. That's very significant because that means they feel they've ruled everything else out. They've ruled out Chinese. They've ruled out the Russians. They've ruled out some secret project that is ours that somehow, got seen by the Roosevelt crew or the Nimitz crew who took those videos, the pilots that were part of those groups that took those videos. So they're saying that they feel those are genuine unknowns represented in those videos. The weird thing is they also told him those videos were not to be released to the public. On the surface, that may seem like, oh my gosh, so Lou was kind of a whistleblower. He released these UFO videos even though he wasn't supposed to. Normally, of course, for the UFO community, that'd be very exciting. Everybody would be like, wow, that's great. This whistleblower got the info out, which is what we've been waiting for. Unfortunately, some of the naysayers out there, including Mr. Greenwald, are like, oh, look, he released these things and he didn't go through the proper procedures. However, we just got a couple weeks ago, and I got this myself in my own FOIA request, an email string regarding the release of those videos. Not only do we have a release form that was filled out and stamped by the Navy, approved for release, we also got an email correspondence where you can see Elizondo discussing with the Navy about the release of the videos. So we have this correspondence, we have this document that all shows the videos were released for the public, yet we have this, press public relations person saying, no, they weren't supposed to be released to the public. So it creates some problems. First of all, why are they doing this? This keeps happening over and over again. They say when they acknowledge something is real, like even when they acknowledge that the DD 1910, the form that allows a release of those videos, even when they confirmed that was real, they said, however, it wasn't supposed to be released to the general public. Now, this is after they said those videos had nothing to do with the Department of Defense, and they were not released by the Department of Defense. That was not true. They had everything to do with the Department of Defense. They were released by the Navy. In fact, we know of, even though not all their names are revealed, some of us know, and at least we know of the pilots, and we know the pilots who know the pilots who took those videos and or interacted with those objects. So they certainly were taken by Navy pilots who were chasing something that they did not know what it was. Why the Navy is saying that these were not supposed to be seen by the public, I don't know why they would say that, especially when we have these emails, we have this document that says otherwise. But it gets even further. So Mike Walker, he's in the House Committee for Homeland Security, and he's a very important Republican in the House. He wrote a letter. It was a very educated letter to the Navy saying, hey, you've got these UFOs, you have these UAPs, you're confirming that you have them. What are they? Whose are they? If they're really unidentified, why are you saying that you canceled your investigation, the ATIP group that Lou Elizondo worked for in 2012? Why didn't you continue to do that investigation? I want to know who's investigating that, and if not, why you're not. Why not? And so they gave a response, and the response was essentially, we are investigating them. We do brief the Armed Services Committee, and that's about it, which he took as kind of a blow-off. And he essentially said to Politico, Brian Bender of Politico a week ago, hey, I'm not happy about this. The Navy is blowing me off, and the Navy is hiding information on UFOs. So it's kind of strange that the Navy would come out and say those videos should not have been released. We did not intend that, when there's documentation showing that at least the people who approve it did seem to intend those videos to be out to the public, and when they're being criticized for not sharing information. Why would they then go and say, oh, look, here's another example where we're not sharing information, just like Congressman Walker is upset with us about. So it's a very strange situation. I can say this, though, that there is a lot of interface in the background with some of these witnesses from the Navy. There are people involved, like we saw on the show Unidentified, like Lou Elizondo and Steve Justice and Chris Mellon, who are also speaking with officials. I have a feeling, and this is just my feeling, I think that there's a lot of still kind of chaos going on as far as people understanding all the different departments in the DoD trying to, come to terms with this new world of UFOs being a credible thing. And I think that we're going to see more cooperation, and we're going to see some of these issues cleared up in the future. Hopefully the near future, but I'm pretty sure this is going to happen as all of these groups begin to work together. Information starts to get to all of the departments. I think what we have to understand is that these public affairs people, they are very, very detached from the guys out in the field, the pilots or the people that are actually running these programs. ATIP in particular was a program that was secretive. Harry Reid, by design, didn't want people to really know about it, mostly because he didn't want people to make fun of it and be embarrassed by it. But I think that we're going to be moving forward together as opposed to all of this weirdness that's going on. But Martin, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of all of this? I mean,
well, I've been letting you, I'll be honest with you. I've been trying to get our guest on the phone. So I've been hearing just bits and pieces. I feel really like I'm caught now.
Well, let me ask you it this way then.
Actually, I am here. I am here now.
Oh, great.
All right, Rob, we'll introduce you. Just thank you. Okay.
But I do want to ask you this before we end the news. From your perspective, you see, this email string where apparently they're giving Lou permission to release those videos. And then we have this new news that they're saying those videos are genuinely UAPs, they're unidentified, but we didn't mean to release them to the public. I mean, what does that make you think?
I got to tell you, I've been trying to follow this, and the more this goes on, and I don't know if anyone shares this with me at all, but the more confused I get.
I get it. Yeah.
I don't understand what's going on, and I just wish there could be some type of clarity from, like you said, I heard you say, all the groups perhaps working together. Maybe this can be cleared up and there could be some focus on what exactly is going on, because as time goes on, it just seems more and more confusing to me all the time. I really don't know what to say.
Yeah, I don't blame you, and I don't understand why why they keep muddling the water like this, and why they keep making statements that, especially like this one, that we already have information that counters from the Navy that counters this part that they didn't mean to release those videos. So it's very strange. It's really weird. But I think I just count it down to, I think people are just not all on the same page. And over time, I think they will get on the same page. At least I'm hopeful.
Do you think there's any possibility that there's someone is being fed disinformation in this whole thing to make it confusing like it is? Or do you think it's just miscommunication?
Well, I believe this is an objective perspective. And I don't think that I'm being biased in that other people who are objective, despite some criticism, are coming to the same conclusion. The waters are getting muddied by the public affairs departments. The public affairs departments. At first, I think we were all like, "Who's telling the truth? What's going on?" But what we've seen over time is that Elizondo, the claims that he's made have been backed up by documents. Most of these documents were leaked by George Knapp. but they were confirmed to be real either by the DoD themselves or by people involved with the DoD. So we see that at least Lou has had a consistent record of being accurate and having people back him up on that. So I think that if there is disinformation, it's being introduced by the public affairs departments. And why is that? Is it that they're honestly getting it wrong and they're making genuine mistakes? Is it that they have been given wrong information and then they have to later correct themselves? At this point, because they have to keep correcting themselves, I mean, it's hurting their credibility. I don't know why anybody would kind of take their word for anything at this point, because they keep consistently being wrong. And I don't know why. I think it's probably, speaking of Greenwald, over the years, he's taught us this. He's shown us that these public affairs departments typically don't have the best information, even when he's taken documents he knows to exist and they say, no, they don't exist. And he's like, well, look, I've got it right here. I think that it's a difficult job. They don't have a lot of access to information. So I don't know if it's a genuine mistake or they're trying to muddy the waters because they just are not happy about being left out of the loop of the release of this information. Could be the latter.
Our good friend Lee Spiegel is listening, and he's just texted me a couple of things. His opinion is, one hand doesn't know what the other hand does, and that's always been this way historically. No government wants to risk the negative feedback that will happen if they acknowledge the existence of UFOs. So that's Lee's opinion. So he just joined us.
Yeah, I think he's got something there. Yeah, these different departments, they don't know what each other are doing. So, I do feel for the public affairs department because they're on the back foot and they're having to figure stuff out. And it's probably frustrating for them. And they probably wish someone would have briefed them prior to all of this coming down. But to Lou's point, I think Lou didn't want anybody to know he was going to share this information because he didn't want it to be shut down before he shared it. He wanted the public to get this information. I think that many of us appreciate that and that this information's now out. So it's a tough situation, and that's what I ascribe it to. I don't personally see definitive proof that anybody is disinforming anyone. But if there is disinformation, the group that's been wrong is the public affairs department. So that's where it would be coming from. But I couldn't see them wanting – I hope that that's not what they're doing. I think it's more along the lines of what Lee's saying, and they're just not all on the same page. And hopefully over time they will get there.
Right. Just to let you know that Lee followed all that up with he's the only human that knows the truth.
Who, Lee?
Yeah.
Oh, well, now he's claiming he's human, and I'm not so sure about it.
I doubt that, too. I've always had that feeling. Yeah. All right. Hey, Alejandro, thanks so much. I appreciate it, and thanks for hanging in. And we do have our guest. Have a guest on the line. And, of course, Lee wants me to plug the film, The Phenomenon, coming up. I did an interview with James Fox. That's pretty exciting.
And he did a great presentation at the UFO Congress. He revealed for the first time a lot of what's in that. And we will be posting that video pretty soon here so everybody can see that on our video on demand.
That's right. All right, Alejandro, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Okay, so we're not going to take a break at the time we usually do in a couple minutes. We're going to go all the way to the 6:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's when our break will be. Just one break tonight is what I'm getting at. So our guest, Rob Shelsky, he's an avid and eclectic writer, averages about 4,000 words a day. Wow. I wonder what Nick Redfern does. Must be somewhere around there. But anyway, he has a degree in science. He has a show coming up on the Travel Channel. We can talk about that. He's actually the on-camera expert. And welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me. I didn't think I was going to make it here tonight.
I know. That's so weird. All your settings went haywire, but somehow you figured them out, and here you are.
Yeah, I rebooted everything. Too bad we can't do that with our lives sometimes, huh?
Yeah, there's many times I've wanted to do that. Yeah. Just that one little mistake I want to change, But anyway, welcome to the show. Can you tell the listening audience a little bit about your background and what got you interested in this topic?
Sure. My background started when I was very young, was always interested in UFOs. I had a couple odd experiences that way. My brother had one, which was kind of the turning point for me, because when he told me about his, it made me really think a lot more about UFOs, and I began to research them. I was a journalist for Alien Skin magazine, investigative journalist, and went on site to various locations. I was a MUFON field investigator. I've been investigating UFOs on my own now for about almost 30 years. And as I do research, I write books about what I find out, and quite a few books got published, to the point where now apparently they're considering me an on-camera expert, but we'll see about that.
Yeah, I heard, I've had a lot of talks about, I was contacted from, I think it was a History Channel a while ago, and they said, we would like to talk to you about finding us a UFO expert. And I said, well, if anyone claims they're a UFO expert, run the other way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think, I know that I know just as much about them or less than I did, 8 years ago. 8 years ago when I started the show coming up. But
now, I'm sorry, you say you know just about the same amount as you did 8 years ago?
No, I think I know less.
Oh, well, it's kind of true in a way, because every time you come up with another question, you're adding to the knowledge you don't have. And the more we learn about UFOs, the more questions we have like that.
Right. Now, have you ever personally had a sighting of your own?
Yes, I had a weird sighting. Well, I can't really call it a sighting. When I was about 6 in Australia, I woke up one night in an absolute panic and fear, and I walked into the hallway, and I saw what looked like some kind of space person or creature looking at me through the back door. Our hallway went straight from the front door to the back, and the back door had glass in it. And I panicked, and I ran into my parents' room and told them what I was seeing. And of course, my father goes, "You're just having a nightmare, go back to bed." But that has stuck with me all my life. That was no dream, whatever it was. So I've just decided that I was interested in UFOs after that and got into it all the more.
Wow. So did you see any signs of, any lights or anything like that? Or was it just whatever that being was?
Oddly, at the time was when we had a full solar eclipse over Australia within like a day later. So I don't know if there's any connection there or not. Now, since then, I have seen a UFO over Greensboro. And being a MUFON field investigator, I've been exposed to a lot of people and the sites where they said they saw things. And I would guess about 5 to 7% are probably seeing something that is out of the ordinary. I certainly did. Again, it's like with you. You can sort of figure out what they're not. It's what they are that leaves you wondering. I mean, I looked at this thing for about, almost 2 minutes over Greensboro, and I had time to rule out a jet, a helicopter, a dirigible, a drone, an air balloon, all of this stuff. So I know what it wasn't. I just don't know what it was, other than it was an unidentified flying object.
Well, you just reminded me that I just posted about an hour or so ago one of the interviews that I did out at the UFO Congress. I'm just letting people know that on YouTube, if you want to check that out, and that's about the Victorian UFO Action Group. They were visiting the states. They went to Roswell, they went to Socorro, and they went to the UFO Congress. So I sat down with, I think, about 6 of them and had a nice conversation. So check that out on YouTube. That's on Martin Willis Live Shows on YouTube. Also, it will be a podcast posted this coming week on our website for supporters only. So check that out. Anyway, so when did you move out of Australia? How old were you when you moved here to the States? Were you born in Australia?
No, I was born in Texas. My mother was Australian. We emigrated there. We came back when I was 12. I lived in Texas about 6 weeks after I was born. And so I don't really know Texas well. But yeah, I came back and slowly got more and more into the whole thing. Lived in San Diego, went to university in Canada, San Diego State. But all through this, the UFO process kept slowly developing for me. There was a sighting over San Diego. 50,000 people saw it at the San Diego Stadium Arena. And so I wasn't the only one. But whatever it was, we don't know. It was a mystery space object, was the headlines in the newspaper. And then I saw the UFO in Greensboro, and my brother has missing time. So I just sort of gradually fell into all of this. And if anyone asks me, do I believe in UFOs? I say, no, I don't believe in them. I think there's enough evidence to suppose they actually exist. It's like saying you believe in a refrigerator or don't believe. Whether you believe or not, they're there.
Yeah, my friend Sam Moranto is real big on that. Exactly what you're saying. He always cringes when someone says or asks him if he believes in UFOs. Kind of goes along that same line. So you're here in the States, and when was this at the stadium in San Diego that you were just talking about?
Oh, that was back in the early 70s, I believe. And then the Greensboro sighting was 2 years ago. And
okay.
Yeah, so that one was more recent. I don't think they're singling me out. Maybe they are. Maybe they're singling out my family because, again, my brother has missing time, and so does his friend. And they don't know if they were abducted or not because they've never gone through any kind of hypnosis. I kind of warned them against that.
Yeah, that's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
And speaking of that, Calvin Parker from the Pascagoula incident, we're in touch all the time now. Of course, I met him out in Phoenix, and he's been on the show a number of times. So Calvin just was regressed. He just went through regression therapy, and that's going to be transcribed. If anyone's following that, you can check out Phil Mantle's website. I'm sorry, Phil Mantle's Facebook page. He's going to put the transcription of the, which I think is very daring of Calvin Parker. He's going to post that transcription at some point. Regression therapy, yeah, I understand it can be scary, and people like I've mentioned this before. Travis Walton said he did it once, he would never do it again, and a lot of people are scared, by what they may find out. They don't want to know, and things are better off just the way they are. So I know there's some people that can do a really nice job, and some people that may lead someone along. But what was your thoughts when you told your brother that?
When I told him about the hypnotism?
Yeah, stay away from it.
Yeah, he wanted to know why. And I said, well, the definition of hypnotism is the power of suggestion. And unless you have an extremely well-qualified hypnotist, they can plant false memories that you then, when you wake up, believe are real, and you think of them as real from that point forward. All they have to do is say something like, tell us about your UFO experiences. And that plants the suggestion. And the human mind, according to psychologists, is very flexible and quite willing to make up any fabricated stories you like to please you. But unfortunately, then when you wake up, you remember them as being real. But that is the power of suggestion. They can make you believe you're a chicken or a dog or a cat, or they can make you believe you had memories of something you didn't have. This has also been a problem with reincarnation regression as well.
Interesting. Interesting. So can you tell us, did you already describe the sighting you had in Greensboro, or was that that wasn't one you described yet, right?
No, it was a silver orb-shaped craft. At first, I thought it was the nose of a jet because there were some clouds in the sky. And I thought, well, it's just the nose of a jet. I was stopped at a stoplight, and I was a MUFON field investigator at the time. And I thought, okay, that's just a jet coming out from clouds, but it wasn't. It came out of the clouds, and it was like a silver orb. And then right away, my so-called professionalism kicked in, and I began to try to find out what it wasn't so I could kind of pin what it was. Unfortunately, my phone was dead, so I couldn't take any pictures. And my state director asked me, she said, why did you report it, Rob? I said, no, I didn't report it. She said, why? I said, we're getting reports of UFOs by the thousands every year. Just knowing that someone else saw another UFO doesn't really add significantly to our database other than the location and the time, which I said is a valid thing to add. But we have tons of data now over decades and decades. We need to start utilizing the data to get some answers.
And how would you think that, what does that look like to you?
Well, it takes extensive research. MUFON has a huge database, which I had access to for quite a while. And what you start doing is try to cross-relate things. Where are the hot spots? Are there hot spots? Are there patterns to this? Are there areas that see more UFOs than not? Of course, we know that there are. But is there anything more to it, any more specific? Are UFO sightings on the rise? What type of UFOs are we seeing? Is it more triangles and less cylinders, less flying saucer types? There's so much information we could find out. We could probably find trends, and we could probably ascertain quite a bit about what their capabilities are. There's been enough sightings, film, and photos, legitimate ones. I'm not talking about the hoaxes, of course, the photoshops, where we should be able to start using this data to arrive at some answers. And that's why I'm in this business. I want answers.
Now, you said that you've been at this for about 30 years. I seem to have noticed that there's a lot more triangles. Maybe it's just that there's, maybe I just hear about it more. But what have you seen over the years, like a change in what people are claiming they see?
Yes, definitely. Triangles are really on the rise and have been. They were first started seen around late 1980s, early 1990s along the Hudson River Valley. A vast silent triangle about the size of a football field hovered over a house, made almost no noise at all. And if it had any noise, it was like a low hum. And it did have lights underneath it. And from that point forward, and actually, I went up to the area of Pine Bush, New York, and camped out there for a number of days in the hopes of spotting some UFOs. Unfortunately, on that trip, I did not. Gulf Breeze, yes, I did see one. So, but I do take these investigatory trips abroad to England for its superstorm of UFOs, Pine Bush, Gulf Breeze, Florida, anywhere where there seems to be a large number of sightings, I'll go to check it out.
What's your idea on why there are hot spots?
Well, the data seems to show that they do like military bases, nuclear power plants, that sort of thing. However, we seem to be seeing them all over the place, and the sightings are on the rise. Some psychiatrists felt that it was the fear and anxiety of the Cold War that caused many people to think they saw a UFO when they didn't, and that it was like a Cold War hysteria. So they felt that once the Cold War was over, these would drop off. The reverse has happened. These number of sightings have gone up, and almost on an annual basis. Partly it's because people have more phones, they're becoming more aware of it, they've got more cameras with those phones, so we're getting a lot more input now, whereas before people would see one but didn't have a camera handy, because they didn't have phone cameras. So, but now they do, and they're taking pictures, and with that evidence, they're willing to report it.
I can't remember who it was. I think it was Seth Shostak from SETI. By the way, he's going to be on hopefully next month if all goes well. We're going to be talking actual UFOs. But he said something like, why don't we have, with all the millions of cell phones, camera-taking cell phones in everybody's pocket, why don't we have a really good, clear picture of a UFO? And to me, when I see a really clear picture, the first thing I think of is CGI or something. But so what would be your answer to someone like Seth Shostak on that question?
Well, first of all, you're not expecting to ever see a UFO. So you have to see one. You have to react. You have to grab your phone. You have to turn it on. You have to quickly focus. And frankly, camera phones are not the best for taking pictures. They want to do everything automatically, so they tend to fuzz the picture. They're trying to focus on the background, and this thing can be so far away that they simply don't want to focus on it. So the picture often comes out fuzzy. However, I've seen some pretty darn good evidence of UFOs, and our photo analysts at MUFON certainly have determined that many of them are real and not touched up or photoshopped.
Mm-hmm. I have a conversation with Mark D'Antonio, who's actually now he's MUFON's photo and video analyst. A lot of people don't like him; they think he's a debunker. I like Mark; he's a character, and he's basically says that there's only been a couple of photos that he thinks maybe really can be something. He is really good at figuring out what is not, just like you said earlier in your conversation. What something is not. And I showed him something one time I thought for sure was a mistaken picture that I took. And right away he said, it looks like something was on your window. So sure enough, I went into my car window and I looked at the angle where I took the picture, and there was a little tiny piece of grass sitting on the window that looked like a perfect disc. So that can happen. But anyway, I got to tell you, you just mentioned about how difficult phones can be or not that good. But I was out in my front yard on the water, and a bald eagle came in and landed like 25 feet away from me in the water and grabbed a big fish. And I'm fumbling and fumbling with my phone. And by the time I actually got the photo, whatever it's called, the app open, he was already gone. He had already dragged the fish on the other side.
And also, if that bird was flying away from you at any speed, your camera would be trying to constantly refocus on a vanishing dot. And it's very hard for these automated cameras to do that. They want to focus on a wider field if they can. And they do have their problems. They also have been noted for causing orbs. The slightest decibel in a digital camera will pick it up and turn it into an orb. And I've had that happen to me. I had a new house, but walked in, took some pictures. I didn't see the orbs. Came out, and all my photos were loaded with these little orbs all over the place. Turned out they were dust motes from the construction people. So and on a investigation of a haunted mansion in Ohio, I thought I had ectoplasm caught in one film. It was my own breath. It looked quite good on camera. It was a cold night.
Yeah.
So again, you have to be so careful. But MUFON is extremely careful. We rule out about 95% of all of the reports. I have had reports that were really darn good reports, but because they took place near an airport or a private airport, I've had to discount them. Yeah. And my state director here said, well, you don't think it happened? I said, oh, I think it probably happened, all right? It probably is the way she described it. But because of mitigating circumstances, I can't say that this was a genuine UFO she saw. It could have been other things. And whenever it could have been other things, we just say it was, and then we don't count it as in the UFO count.
The landing lights, they're coming at you. They're big, bright lights. You kind of have to discount for the most part, unless there's really strange activity when you're seeing a light in the sky. A lot of times it's just a light in the sky. So
well, that's true, and it could be a satellite going overhead. It could be a plane in the distance. Could be a helicopter. Could be a drone these days.
Right. Yeah, we have a lot to look out for. Chinese lanterns, you name it, where you can be fooled real quickly, and drones. I don't think they're going to be going away. So we really have to keep in mind when we see these things. Now, I'm sure you've been following what's happened since I know you really didn't hear much of the conversation with Alejandro and I, but what's been happening since the Pentagon admitted they were looking into the UFO field or UFOs in general, or some type of aerial threats. And it's been an easier topic to talk about. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the current flavor of the month kind of thing. I think it's compelling. I think it again, we don't know a lot about it, but what we do know tells us some of what we don't know. We know that the Navy was highly interested in the Nimitz incidents, of course. We do know that the commander of the 6 jets that were in the squadron said this thing looked like a giant tic-tac, had no apparent propulsion system or wings. It was like a white featureless cylinder, but it could outmaneuver his jets as if they were standing still, according to him. You do have some ground-to-air radar, just as we did in Belgium. These things are real. I mean, they're not our imagination. They're not geese flying across the sky or someone misinterpreting something. These are trained observers. These people do this for a living. We have policemen. We have military personnel. We have pilots, both commercial and military, who have all claimed on numerous occasions they've spotted UFOs with witnesses to go with it, including some of the control towers seeing them on radar as well. We have people who've died from encounters with UFOs. So if they're imagination, how the heck does that happen? We've had people injured in the hundreds. We've had property damage. This has been going on at least since 1947. And if you look at it historically, apparently it's been going on for centuries.
Can you tell us about any of the cases that you personally investigated that you thought were compelling?
Well, actually, we're not really, we are supposed to keep it as anonymous as possible. But they range from the mundane, where someone saw a strange light in the sky and took a picture of it, to where they saw silvery objects that danced about the sky and had some video. I've had other cases where one woman said she wrestled with a gray alien in her bedroom, never saw a UFO or anything, but this thing was attacking her and she tried to choke it to death.
Oh, wow.
And she was a minister. So, but I mean, you run the whole gamut. And of course, you have to sit there and you have to listen with an open mind because you don't know what anything and everything is capable of. So I try to keep an open mind and listen to it, but then I kind of have to discount it because number one, it wasn't a UFO sighting. And number two, the woman didn't strike me as incredibly stable. And so therefore, when I wrote it up, I said, not a sighting.
So that must be kind of difficult to make a judgment.
And I don't like doing it. I'd rather just have reported the information without having to do that final step of what I have determined whether it is, because that determines whether it goes in the database or not as a genuine sighting. And I don't know this woman. Who am I to make a judgment call on her after just one meeting and a couple phone conversations?
Right. How many would you say, if you could kind of figure a calculation for the things that you've looked at, end up being what they call an unknown and move on?
Well, quite a few are unknown. I would say that only about they're saying 5% on average, but mine was more like 7 or 8%. Seemed to have been genuine UFO sightings that people were reporting. There was enough evidence to suppose that they were seeing something that wasn't. Everything else had been discounted that it could be. I mean, when we do an investigation, we go out to the actual site, we walk the grounds, we look for any physical evidence on the ground, we check all the weather records for that day, we know if it was cloudy, how windy it was, we check air flight patterns out of the local airports, international airports, to make sure it couldn't have been anything at that given time and moment. So we're really pretty thorough about it when we do these investigations.
Right. And I think there's now some apps too that help, and iPhone apps that actually help out with investigation, from what I understand.
Yes, there are. We prefer that the observer of the incident doesn't use those. We prefer to get them unsullied, if you know what I mean, not having spoken to many people first, because every time a person tells their story, it embellishes. One woman who saw a UFO started off by saying she saw it for about 5 or 6 seconds. By the end of our conversation, she had seen it for approximately 4 minutes. So, things change as they tell it to you.
Right. And, you mentioned your brother and his friend had missing time, and that's such a bizarre thing. That's almost like someone could do a show on that alone.
That was critical. That was critical to my getting involved in all of this. I'd always had a strong interest in the paranormal, had already been reading and researching it. But when my brother finally told me this, 20 years or so or more after it happened, I was absolutely flabbergasted because my brother was unimpeachable. My brother is no liar, and neither was his friend John. I'd grown up with them nearby, I knew them. And I mean, John, and I knew my brother, Mike. And I know for a fact that he wasn't lying. In fact, he just was watching television one night, and the memory came back of seeing a red light in the sky over the desert when he and his friend John were camping out. It was about midnight, and he said, that looks like it came down near us. Should we go investigate? And John goes, yeah, let's do it. That's the last thing they remember. The next thing they remember is striking camp in the morning and John's father picking him up at about 9 a.m., and they left. Now, they never spoke about it at all. Never said, hey, how about that red light? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They had no memory of it. And so my brother moved to Vegas. John stayed in San Diego. And then my brother remembered it. He called John. He said, do you remember this? And John goes, well, I do now. I hadn't until this moment.
Wow.
He said, well, what happened to us? And John said, I don't know. But it was so compelling for them that John sold his house in San Diego, took his wife and kids, and moved to Las Vegas to be near my brother, who was living near Nellis Air Force Base and Area 51 at the time. And they spent years researching this and getting heavily involved into it. And then abruptly, my brother dropped it all. Absolutely wanted nothing more to do with it.
Do you know why? Did he say why?
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah. Well, yes and no. It was pretty obvious he was scared, that he felt it was going in a very negative, dark direction. So I asked him, I said, Mike, on your deathbed, if you could have the answers, would you like to know? And he said, it depends. And I said, on what? Whether the answers are good or bad? He said, yes, exactly. I said, so you'd rather die unknowing? He said, yes. I just want to have what's left of my life in peace and quiet, and I don't want to know any more about any of this.
I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine that, if he'd been through what he'd been through. So, I mean, he did have an implant that was gouged out. He did have a scoop mark. I have no doubt that he was probably abducted, although he will not say that, and I will not say that because we do not have evidence, and I'm an evidence kind of guy.
Okay. Well, let's see, we have about 5 minutes left. So I did want to talk, I listened to you on another show, and I don't want to say I want to debate you, but I just wanted to I wanted to challenge you a little bit on you have I think you've written a couple books about, you have a theory that the moon may be hollow. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that in the 5 or so minutes we have before the break.
Well, it started when I was on Coast to Coast Radio. George Noory asked me what I thought of the hollow moon theory, and I laughed and I said, not much. I think it's silly. The moon's there, it's in the sky, pulls our tides. It's not hollow. And then I started investigating. It just tweaked my imagination. And the evidence I found, although not conclusive, is certainly intriguing. I mean, we have no good theory for the origin of the moon, not even now with the impact theory. There's a lot of things wrong with it. There's a lot of oddities about the moon. Its density is too low for its size. And yet the rock seems to be made of the same material as our rock here on Earth, the Earth's mantle. So if it's the same material and the moon's as large as it is, where's the missing mass? It has to have taken from somewhere. So it's either got large caverns or it's hollow. Several scientists, including a couple at NASA, I've quoted them in my book, literally say it's easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than to explain its existence. And another one said, the way the seismographs left on the moon recorded moonquakes seem to show that the moon either had a very strange core that doesn't allow seismic waves to travel through it, which is very bizarre, or it's hollow. It raises the frightening question that the moon may be hollow. And this goes on. And then it was 2 Soviet scientists who came out with the idea of the spaceship moon theory in the 70s. They were members of the Soviet Science Academy. So there's big names involved here, McDonald of NASA and all sorts of others. Vasin, Sherbakov, all these people have talked about this and delved into it, and they've come up with some very reasonable scenarios. The big craters on the moon are shallow. The small ones are deep, as if there was an inner shell that was making the big meteorites bounce back up. The layers on the moon, the top 3 layers of soil, are in reverse order, with the densest being on top and the lightest being 3 layers down. We can't account for that.
Would that have anything to do with atmosphere or gravity?
That would have to do anything that has gravity will have the densest material in the center and the lightest material on the surface. Throw a bunch of different types of soil into a glass of water, shake it up really good and let it settle. You'll see all sorts of layers. The densest are always at the bottom. But on
I'm
the moon,
thinking of like helium-3, which I know there's a lot of on the moon. Isn't that like more toward the surface? And isn't that like a lighter material?
It's on the moon, and it is helium-3, and it is a lighter material, and it is not atmospheric. It's not gaseous in nature. But so there is no atmosphere on the moon to speak of. In fact, when the Apollo moon landed and jettisoned its tanks, it actually incrementally gave the moon a tiny bit of atmosphere. It was big at the time because it's so close to a vacuum. But we also have strange lights on the moon. NASA commissioned a report over the last 500 years, and it's still going on right now. We have seen streaks, flashes, beacons, tracks, volcanoes. There are no volcanoes on the moon. We have seen mists. We have seen fogs. We've seen strange lights. We've seen blinking lights and a lot of blue lights. There's one crater that is so known for this phenomena, that Aristarchus crater, that is referred to by astronomers, not me, astronomers, as the blue gem. Now, if the moon's a dead world with no atmosphere, what is all this stuff?
What are they trying to explain these phenomena that you just mentioned?
Well,
as like standard refractions.
Yeah, standard scientists are. The problem is there's so many different types of these. They call it transient lunar phenomena, and the report by NASA was commissioned by NASA, and it's online. You can take a look at it or get my book. It's at the back of my book, and but no one explanation can explain all of it. For instance, about a century ago, and volcanoes, what they thought were volcanoes, are noticed on the moon. These weren't just quick blips and gone. These went on for months. Some things went on for years. This they call it transient lunar phenomenon, and a lot of it is very transient, but some of it sticks around enough for other observatories to observe it easily and over long periods of time. But the moon has no volcanoes, so what were they seeing? Well, they're seeing lightning on the moon, but there's no atmosphere. How do you get lightning in a void? they're seeing tracks and streaks and beacons and these flashes, and they're in different locations, but principally around two craters, Plato and Aristarchus, I believe, are the two. How do we account for Neptunium-237 being on the moon? Its half-life is less than 2.5 million years. There should be no Neptunium-237 on the moon. There's none on the Earth. We have to create it artificially.
How is that created naturally?
It's
just because I don't know. I don't even know what it is. So
well, it's a highly radioactive substance, and it has a very short half-life of just under 2.5 million years, relatively speaking, short half-life. It can occur naturally. It probably was on Earth at the beginning, but because the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and the half-life of Neptunium-237 is only 2.5 million years, it long since ceased to exist on the Earth. If the moon is that old, it should have ceased utterly to exist on the moon too, but it's there. We also have titanium on the moon in larger amounts than on the Earth. We have these large maria, these flat gray areas that they believe are lava flows. They're only on the side facing the Earth. On the far side of the moon, there aren't any.
Let me ask this, going back to the radioactive material. Does an atmosphere play any aspect in a half-life on a material like that?
Not normally, no. It's a constant rate of decay, like uranium U-238, polonium, any of this stuff. I mean, any of the radioactive isotopes at the top end of the periodic table. And the higher you go, the shorter the half-lives are. Some of them are mere split seconds before they decay. I mean, uranium U-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. So we only have half left of what the Earth started out with 4.5 billion years ago. The rest of it eventually degraded into some other element. I believe it was lead. But and that's odd because lead can stop radiation. Isn't it funny something should decay from a radioactive state to something that blocks radiation?
Isn't that strange?
Yeah, wow. If it is lead, I think I remember reading it does decay eventually into lead, but I'm not positive about that.
Okay,
but I remember thinking the time and strength.
Oh, all right. Yep. We're ready to go into break. So on YouTube, hang in there. We'll be back in a few minutes over at KGRA Radio. We'll be back right after the messages. So again, hang in. We'll be right back right after these messages. All right, welcome back to the show. My guest this evening is Rob Shelsky, and we are talking. We were talking about the moon when we went to break. His idea, or I don't want to say it's not your theory, but it's something that you've actually been paying attention to. Is that the best way to put it?
Well, it was something I became involved with, began researching because I just wanted, again, to have some answers. And the answers I've gotten seem to indicate that we can't account for the moon's origin, not even now. We do not understand why the moon is so odd. We don't understand a great deal about the moon. We don't understand why we have such a big moon. We don't understand why it has such a nicely circular orbit. We don't understand why it's right at the perfect distance for full solar eclipses and to do the vernal and autumnal equinoxes and solstices. And we don't know why the moon is behaving the way it does. It rings like a bell when it's struck. Now, one NASA scientist just recently said, well, it doesn't actually ring like a bell, it resonates. Well, that's exactly what a bell does when you strike it. It resonates, and to us, that's a ring.
Well, on that in particular, there are what's called ringing rocks, like there's a place, a park, I think it's called like Ringing Rock Park, where you hit a rock with a hammer and it rings.
Right, for a very short time, not for hours. When the moon is struck by when they drop the base of the Apollo ship back onto the moon, they did quite deliberately. They wanted to hear what it did to the seismographs and how they responded, and the moon vibrated for hours, not 5 or 10 minutes or seconds or even half an hour, hours. Which one NASA scientist said makes them wonder if the moon isn't hollow.
Well, the Earth would never do that because it has a mantle and above it, so it's not the rocky part of it's not so accessible. But if you took like a metal, even bell metal or something like that, and you made a sphere out of it and you tried to ring it, it's not going to ring. I don't believe. I think you need like an open surface for it to ring, but solid rock can ring. I mean, I'm just trying to, be devil's advocate here.
Well, two things. The Earth does vibrate. When we have earthquakes, they travel back and forth across Earth, sometimes for hours. Now with us, they go through our core and out the other side and back again. Now on the moon, they don't go through the core. They go around the core, but they don't go through the core, which again, the one NASA scientist said raises the alarming idea that the moon either has a very strange core indeed, or it's hollow. So yes, the Earth will vibrate. Well, I would prefer vibration rather than ringing. The ringing is a bit of a melodramatic phrase. The moon can't ring because there's no air. You wouldn't hear anything, but it vibrated, it resonated. And yes, you can have an object that's spherical and metal and strike it. You won't hear it ringing because the sound is inside of the sphere and very muffled underneath that metal. But they do ring in the sense that they vibrate. And normally when the Earth is struck, it will vibrate for a short while, but it won't vibrate for hours. And that's just one of the problems with the moon. I mean, the list actually just goes on and on. Everything from that helium-3 and Neptunium-237 to Aristarchus crater. And again, there's that problem with these mists and these clouds and these markings we see on the moon. It's almost as if something's moving around on the lunar surface that time, and then it's gone, it vanishes. And of course, there was that weird space music from Apollo 12 when they circled the moon. I'm sorry, I think it was Apollo 10 when they circled the moon, just the one before they landed there. And 11 was the first landing, so I think it must have been 10. But they circled the moon, and they picked up what they call space music on the far side of the moon. Now, the problem there is you can't beam radio stations to the far side of the moon of anything in orbit there. They won't get it if they're in the shadow of the moon. The moon blocks it. It has to be direct line of sight, so to speak. Right. So whatever they were picking up wasn't anything from our satellites or Earth or anything like that. Secondly, NASA said, oh, well, it's probably interference. These are trained astronauts, and they even kept some of the music so you could hear it. This is not interference. What it is, I don't know, but I can tell you what it's not again.
Mm-hmm. Well, what would be the purpose of the moon being hollow? Or is there a purpose to the moon being hollow if it was indeed hollow?
Well, Vassin and Sherbakov felt that the reason the moon was hollow is because it was a spaceship, that it had either been terraformed into one or used as one and had been shifted either into closer Earth orbit or somehow had been shifted. From what evidence I can find, this may have taken place about 12,000 years ago or 10,000 BCE. The evidence seems to show that there was a time when we had no moon in our skies. In fact, the Greeks referred to a time before they inhabited Greece when the Proselenes lived there. These were people who lived there before there was a moon, and they're called Proselenes, literally, before there was a moon. The Romans referred to the Proselenes as well. We have stories by American North, South, and Central American tribes that always begin their stories, their legends with, in the time before there was a moon. So we do seem to have some recorded history that seems to date back to a time before there was a moon. And people say, well, the moon has tides. Without the tides, life wouldn't have evolved the way it did.
Yeah, I was just gonna bring that up.
Well, first of all, we do have tides. The Earth's centrifugal force from rotating actually causes tides. The oceans don't quite keep up with our rotation. So that causes a tide. The sun also causes tides. So we had tides.
I don't know about the last part you just said there, the rotation, because if that was the case, then there would be so many things affected by the rotation if a tide was affected by a rotation.
Well, you have to remember it's a very mild effect. It causes a slight lowering of the tides, not nearly as severe as the moon does.
I know we can have tidal pull from the nearest planet or the sun. There's all tidal. It all works in together. But as far as the rotation, I would think that, with the gravity, it's just like we don't feel any part of the rotation. There's no other evidence of what a rotation would cause for a tidal change that I'm aware of.
Well, actually, there is evidence that we have the Coriolis effect, which comes from centrifugal force, and that's what causes our jet streams. The reason we have such powerful jet streams looping around the planet from west to east is because of the rotation of the Earth. The air isn't moving as fast as the ground is, so it creates wind, and we call it the jet stream. That's a very simplified explanation for it, but it's an accurate one.
I always thought that had something to do with the power of the sun causing that.
Well, of course, the sun helps the air rise. It helps to do a lot of things. But the fact that that wind is moving always in the same pattern around the Earth is from the Coriolis effect.
Coriolis effect. Well, you certainly give me a lot of things to research. Yeah, I find it interesting. So, if isn't part of our evolution based on like the drastic tidal changes? I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. It seems like it would be.
Well, biologists, there are a lot of species that do depend on our moon and the cycle of the moon, and there's no doubt about it. But life evolves and changes very quickly to match circumstances. Now, did we not have a moon at all? I'm not going to say that. I think the moon shifted position sometime around 12,000 years ago. And I think that's what happened. Did the moon just arrive? It could have. But, we know the moon wasn't captured by the Earth because it's just mathematically impossible for something that large to go into a perfect circular orbit around the Earth unless something acted as a brake on it. And that braking would have had to have been a much more extensive atmosphere than we have now. And none of our evidence shows that ever happened or ever was that way. The moon had to have been supposedly shifted into position or moved here. Now, this may sound really wacko, but Carl Sagan himself said that one of our best space bases could be a hollowed out asteroid. You shift wind into orbit around the Earth, and it'd be much quicker and much easier to basically turn that into a space station than to try to haul everything up at great expense from Earth and to do it. Plus, when you're done, you would have an asteroid that you could fit 50,000 people inside of for an average asteroid, not even one of the big ones. And on top of that, if it was a nickel iron asteroid, you'd have a marvelous protective device, a shield against you and radiation, solar flares, all that sort of thing, cosmic rays. You could live quite comfortably in an enclosed environment, maybe for tens of thousands of years. So, and we actually technologically are capable of doing that right now at great expense. But then remember, Carl Sagan also pointed out that an asteroid brought into Earth orbit could be mined to hollow it out, and that would give us a gross national product worldwide of $9 trillion, which is exactly the output of the entire planet's gross national product on a yearly basis. So one asteroid alone could provide us with enough mineral wealth to give us that kind of an income. So are we the first to have thought that up? Did someone in some other system come up with that idea? Were they running from some malevolent alien race and wanted to hide in the deep space? Once you're inside a sealed environment, drifting in the depths of interstellar space with lots of other dead worlds, rogue planets, you'd be awfully hard to find. It's a great way to survive.
Yeah, but I mean, the Earth's so close, wouldn't they want to just live here?
Well, I compare it to people who are out in the cold and every now and then want to come in and get warm their feet by the fire. Maybe they drift from solar system to solar system and basically tank up. No ecosystem that is intelligently made lasts forever. You do have to replace things. And there seems to be historical evidence that there was mining by aliens here on Earth, and we did it at their direction. We have the Vedic texts of India that say this. We have the Mahabharata and the Ramayana that talk about it. We have the Anunnaki of the Sumerian, who predated the Babylonian Empire, and they talk about the fact that we're designed specifically to do this task. Apparently, the aliens weren't real suited to the Earth environment. And something else, too. Where the moon is, it makes it the high ground. And any military expert will tell you that you always want to have control of the high ground. Well, if there are aliens on the moon, they do.
Well, it's an interesting thought. I know I think there's the Athea theory, which is that, like a large planet hit us. We sort of conjoined and, broke apart. I understand what you're saying about the Earth the moon has just a slight elliptical orbit around us. It's something like a few percent or 5% or something like that.
It's extremely low. Only Venus has a more circular orbit. So, and Venus is a strange world too. It has a retrograde rotation. We don't know why.
I know there is a theory among the theories. There are 4 or 5 theories of the moon, and one of them is that the Earth could have been struck by several asteroids and then have form a disk like Saturn, and that to explain basically how it could have formed and have more of a circular orbit. But it's all interesting.
Well, there's no real evidence for that one. The impact theory is not bad. The Theia was about the size of Mars approximately, and struck the Earth and smashed into it, and they both basically broke apart to a large extent, and that formed a ring around the Earth that eventually turned into the Moon. But now there's a problem with that theory too. The far side of the Moon's crust is thicker than the near side. Now the spaceship theory says that's because they're pumping out debris from the hollow center on one side, but not the other. The second thing is there had to have been two moons, and one had to crash into the other one later to account for the thicker far side of the Moon. Finally, if Theia and the Earth smashed together and basically broke up for a little bit, they say the Moon formed in less than 100 years, by the way, and if it did break up, then the Moon should be composed of material both from Theia and from the Earth. We have found no isotopic signatures of anything but Earth-like material on the Moon. Nothing that corresponds to an alien world. And every world has its own isotopic signatures, and so does every asteroid practically. We would quickly know, we know meteors come from the Moon because of the isotopic signatures. We know they come from Mars for the same reason, but the Moon has no material from Theia that we've ever found yet.
But we wouldn't know what Theia material was, would we?
Well, we would know it wasn't Earth's isotopic signature. It'd have to be something else. But we haven't found anything else. All we have found is the same isotopic signature as the mantle of our own Earth.
And what about moon rocks? Are you saying that's what we actually find?
That's what we're basing it on, those pounds and pounds of moon rocks they brought back from every trip to the Moon. And also meteorites from the Moon. None of them show an isotopic signature different from that of Earth. So for a long time, we thought the Earth and Moon must have formed out of the same material at the same time. But that apparently can't work either. There are 5 major theories of the origin of the Moon. They all have major problems. Even after the Theia theory came out, and a lot of scientists are gripping onto that with both hands, 2 other scientists came out with the georeactor theory. They thought that maybe there's a natural large amount of radioactive material right at the equator, and that this exploded and launched the Moon, basically. Well, this one has a lot of problems too. In fact, the problems are so bad with most of these that none of them really answer the question or answer it well. There is one theory that does, spaceship moon theory. It answers every single question and problem, from deep craters to shallow craters to Neptunium 237 on the Moon to helium-3. It answers all of it. And, Occam's razor says if you have more than one answer, you go with the one that's simplest. Well, the one that's simplest in this case is the one that answers all the questions.
Well, I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought when they searched down in a crater, they found molten rock in the bottom of one of the craters. Is that not right?
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I've simply never heard that. Not molten rock ever.
Okay.
The moon doesn't have volcanoes. It does have quakes, but they think that's from the tidal pull of the Earth. And here's another oddity. Scientists have calculated that the moonquakes are happening in the wrong spots. They should be happening in certain locations of the Moon if it is the tidal pull of the Earth. But they seem to be happening otherwise, and we don't know why that is either. Again, the Moon is a really mysterious world. Oh, and by the way, there is one other moon that could well be hollow too, and it circles a planet that may have had life on it once too, and that's Mars, and the Moon is Phobos. It has a very strange orbit. Its density is too low, and scientists can't figure out why. And by the way, 2 Soviet probes going to Mars caught a picture of a cylinder near Phobos and then was promptly destroyed, and so was the second one that was right behind it following it. And to this day, we don't know what happened to those 2 probes. But they vanished literally right after they took a photo of something that was cylinder-shaped and sort of white right near the moon Phobos.
Interesting. Well, I was just reading while you're talking here. It says the giant impact basins formed on the infant moon's surface, which caused molten rock to well up and create giant pools of cooled lava. Anyway.
Right. That would make your large craters shallow, but why are the small craters so deep? And the spaceship moon theory says because there's an inner shell, maybe made of titanium. That's why we find titanium on the moon. And that what's happening is with the small craters, the impact hits the moon and burrows into it like it normally should on Earth. But about 25 miles down, there is this shell, so that when large asteroids strike the moon, they rebound off that inner shell, and that creates the flattened, shallow areas of the larger craters.
Okay. Well, if you were arguing with yourself, what would you say?
I do that frequently.
As long as you don't lose. What would you think is like where this thing falls apart? I think I heard you say earlier that holds pretty well. There must be some weak spots in this. I mean, first of all, it sounds illogical on the surface. Like you said when you first heard it, when George Noory asked you. I mean, right away it sounds like, wow, this is really wacky or bizarre. So
I'm not sure it sounds illogical. It just sounds extreme, doesn't it?
It does.
But, yes, but it is an extreme idea, but it's not really, when you think about it, that much more extreme than saying a planet smashed into the Earth. Or saying that the moon was captured as it wandered through the solar system by a little tiny planet. I mean, we have the largest moon of any terrestrial planet in the solar system. It's not the largest moon in the solar system, but it's one of the largest. And this is very strange in itself. The orbit of the moon is strange. Its distance from the Earth is strange. I mean, its density is strange. Its layout of craters and maria is strange. Its reverse of density of layers on the surface is strange. Its weird phenomena of these blinks, flashes, tracks, and glows, and mists, and fogs, and clouds, and lightning, and volcanoes is strange. So how do you explain it all? And none of these theories that exist in mainstream science are willing to do it. And do remember, the spaceship moon theory was promulgated by two mainstream scientists in the field. This is not something that fringe elements made up, like maybe the flat Earth theory or something like that.
I'll never buy into that one, that's for sure.
Nope.
Mary Grace wants to know, is there a higher concentration of anomalous sightings over major craters on the moon?
Absolutely. Again, I refer to Aristarchus and Plato, and there's others to a lesser degree. But there seem to be strange sightings all over the moon. You have to remember that one photo of the moon very early on in our exploration showed a pyramid on the moon. We haven't seen it since. Other photos showed strange things like what they call the needle, a crystal dome. There's even what they call the LA Basin, an area that is grid. It's actually a grid pattern on the surface of the moon. And scientists say, oh, well, that's just channeling from when water or maybe lava flowed in the early days of the moon. Should be long gone. With the number of craters on the moon, that should have been wiped out ages ago. So it didn't happen early on in the moon's history. Had to have happened later. And secondly, it does right angles. When things flow, they don't tend to do right angles. Just look at a delta river pattern of the Mississippi or the Nile, for instance, and you won't see right angles there.
Wow. I think while I'm on this topic, just that it's, I don't have the scientific mind to really, I don't want to say debate or challenge some of what you're saying, because obviously this is very well thought out. It's not just something you're just casting at us. So I would like to open the lines if anyone wants to call in, if they'd like to ask a question about this. And we have Bill, he's screening the calls, and that number is 855-472-5483. And go ahead and give us a call if you'd like to talk to our guest about this theory before we move into something else, because I think I've about run out of questions. I remember reading something a long time ago that the helium-3 is actually something that would be very valuable and very useful for energy.
Oh, absolutely. And especially for a fusion reactor. It'd be a primary source. We have very little of it on Earth, but the moon's loaded with this stuff. And the interesting thing about that is one amateur astronomer did a spectral analysis of the blue glow in the Aristarchus crater, and he overlaid it with the blue glow of a fusion reactor. And he found that spectrally they were exactly the same, that the blue glow in the Aristarchus crater, at least that one time, had the same exact signature, spectral analysis, as a fusion reactor.
Isn't that something? So it could be basically a stepping stone to for say for us if we were going to do some space travel to stop basically at the moon and fuel up, right? I mean, it could possibly be someday.
Or even we could build our deep space ships. I mean, if we could have nuclear powered ships, we could get to Mars in 3 weeks. If you had something along the lines of the Orion, the original Orion that was, which we were capable of building back in the late 1950s, and we certainly are now. The problem is it requires small atomic pellets, literally miniature nuclear bombs, to propel it. And of course, with the nuclear test ban treaty, we couldn't go launching rockets from Earth that were irradiating the atmosphere as they launched. So, but you could build them on the moon and launch them from the moon, and you're not causing any harm. The moon is sterile. The moon is dead, and it's loaded with radiation from the sun and cosmic rays with nothing to protect anyone on the moon.
Right. I know timing is everything when they're on the moon, and we were just lucky all the times that we landed there, basically.
Absolutely, and also with our space station as well. I mean, when you really think about it, we're playing Russian roulette. And now there's evidence to suppose we really can't send people to Mars, not with our present technology, because they would certainly be too irradiated by the time they got there.
Oh, really? I don't know how they're going to protect against that.
They can use water. You know, they used to want to use shielding like lead, but that stuff, any kind of metal can eventually become radioactive in its own right if it's bombarded with enough radiation. It dislodges enough subatomic particles where it becomes radioactive. But water is the perfect defense. You can shield anybody with a few feet of water.
I had no idea. How about that? So anyway, our lines are open. If someone would like to give a call and ask our guest a question. I'm just doing a little bit of adjusting here. And so I guess I'm going to stay on the subject just a little longer. If no one else calls in, we'll move on. I mean, if no one calls in, then we'll just move on. But what type of pushback are you getting from this idea?
Scientists ignore anything to do with UFOs or this kind of idea. They stick to the mainstream. They do this for a number of reasons. One of the major reasons is that they get their grants, and almost all grants at universities come from the U.S. government. And if the U.S. government doesn't want to give you a grant for something, you don't get to research it. That's a big no. Secondly, the ridicule in such is so great that if any scientist technically really wanted to get involved in the research, it's like hitting the third rail. He would not long stay in his profession, and he would be laughed off the planet. This has happened to us before. Alfred Wegener in the 1920s came up with the idea of continental drift. His career was ruined. He died basically an unknown and laughed at. And I mean, his career was over because he dared say that continents might be drifting around the surface of the Earth. Now we take it as a fact. They do drift. But science is very slow to change, and there is a lot of resistance to anything new or different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know there's also the guy that figured out, what was it, atoms. He figured out atoms long before and ended up, dying before it was actually confirmed by Einstein.
Right. And, well, actually, even I believe it was the Greeks who came up with the term atom, but the ancient Greeks. But again, with the continental drifting, he wasn't the first. Now, any of us can look at a globe and clearly see the continents are like a jigsaw puzzle. We can push South America into Africa. We can push North America over into Europe, and they fit very nicely. Yet none of the scientists in the 1920s could see that. Now we take it for granted.
I have a question about that. It's always bothered me because I look at these continents and I could see that they would fit together and could have separated and all that. But what about the ocean bed? I mean, isn't that all part of it?
Well, yes, it is. You have the Marianas Trench, which is subsiding. It's sucking mantle material down into the earth and melting it. And over in the Atlantic, you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is actually pumping out material and creating Iceland and all these places. It's highly active, extremely active. But oceans come and go. Before the continent Pangaea split up, there were several inland seas, but it wasn't until it started ripping apart that oceans water poured in and then created the oceans. But as the continents drift, they just push the water out of the way until they merge or tear apart. Africa right now has the Great Rift Valley. that is along a fault line, and it eventually will become an inland sea in the not too distant future, geologically speaking.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you think of the story of Atlantis, and you think of that they can be off the coast, quite far off the coast, and be scuba diving, and all of a sudden you come across what looks like part of an ancient city or something like that. That is all part of it, I would think, that the moving and the shifting of the continents and
Well,
the
we
land
shouldn't have had any cities back in those days.
I don't mean like cities. I mean some type of stone structures. They find them under the ocean.
Oh yes, we
and
do.
Statues sometimes.
But we think that's well, some of it's due to earthquake activity. The Mediterranean, the land around the Mediterranean, especially in southern Europe, is subsiding, and we have found cities underwater there. We've also found a city underwater off the coast of Pakistan and India, and that was probably due to the melting of the glaciers. In fact, in my book, Ancient Alien Empire, Megalithia, I discuss that in detail because I think there was at one point in time an alien overlord civilization on Earth. The human population was small. It was under their control. It was in isolated communities along the coast. And when you remove that overlayer of technology that they kept under strict control, according to the Vedic texts of India and the Sumerian cuneiform writings, that left a bunch of isolated communities slowly being drowned as the oceans rose and with no contact with each other. And I'm saying small communities. Athens at its peak in the age of Pericles was only a little over 50,000 people, they estimate, which is a small town today.
Wow. You just said a mouthful there. I've thought about, like if it was possible that, aliens were here, tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years ago, how would they suppress the technology? And I think I just heard you say something about guarded technology. Is that what you just said?
Well, we didn't have it. According to every archaeologist on the planet, we were a Neolithic or Paleolithic culture, and we were basically Stone Age hunter and gatherers with a little bit of agriculture. And we were in small numbers. The entire population of the Earth back then was maybe 10 million total. So if you spread that out over all the continents and around the coastlines of all the continents, those are just small pockets of people. In fact, about 70,000 years ago, they estimate that the human race dropped to maybe 5,000 individuals. We almost became extinct. And we know this because there's a genetic bottleneck in our heritage. We all stem from that one little bottleneck of those who survived.
Wow. That's like, was that ice age related?
Well, it was about 70,000 years ago, and we think it was the result of a supervolcano.
Wow. Like a mass extinction?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. I know we're getting way off the UFO topic, but it's interesting to speak to someone that's obviously done a lot of research into a lot of different fields.
Yeah, I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none, right?
Of all the things that you've written about, what do you think, if you had to picture the human race, do you think it evolved on its own like science says, or are you thinking that something else happened along the way?
I think our ancestors evolved right here on Earth, but someone's been interfering with it. Again, Sitchin, in his book about the Sumerians, refers to the fact that in the cuneiform writings, they talk about the gods, the overlords, whatever you want to call them, creating us to do their dirty work, basically, their mining, and that we were supposed to be the beasts of burden, basically, for them, and that they tinkered with us. William Bramley, Gods of Eden fame, he also writes that they try to control us through the use of viruses and plagues, and refers to the Justinian plague, the Black Death, and several others. And he's quite intriguing. I mean, his work is heavy to read, to follow. It's definitely in depth and highly researched, and it's long, and again, it's rather heavy. But if you can wade through it, you learn a heck of a lot that you might not know otherwise about our history of diseases and quite a bit of other things as well. And there's another thing going on here. We are afraid of knowledge. All through history, knowledge has been evil. The Bible says that Adam and Eve ate of the tree of knowledge. There were two trees in the Garden of Eden, according to the Bible. One was the tree of life, one was the tree of knowledge. It was the tree of knowledge that was the forbidden fruit. And by the way, the Greeks picked up on this with their gods Prometheus. He dared to give human beings fire, and for that he's eternally punished, having his entrails pecked out by giant vultures or eagles on a rock in an ocean somewhere for all eternity. The punishment for helping us humans was extreme. And by the way, we even did it more recently in history. In America, back at the time of the Civil War, it was illegal. It was a capital offense to teach a slave to read or write, because once they had knowledge, they could use that to rebel against them. And both the Vedic texts and the Sumerian cuneiform writings talk about a rebellion. And the Vedic texts talk about favored humans flying the Vimana, these so-called flying machines, some as big as cities, some quite small, that the gods had. And the Vedic texts even describe how the things operated and how to avoid mid-air collisions. Now, if all this is just legend and myth, why would you go into such detail, such technical expertise about how it was done and even how the things were propelled? Apparently they used a form of liquid mercury in some fashion. So there's a great deal in our history we just don't seem to remember. I think we have racial amnesia. I think when a war broke out around 12,000 years ago, it was an interstellar war. The Vedic texts talk about it happening in space and even on the surface of the moon. They describe a rebellion at the time, and they describe what sounds very much like what might have been a nuclear war.
Wow. Hey, well, we have a caller. What do you think? We have Vince calling from Ohio. Vince, welcome to the show.
Hi. Good to finally call. I've been listening for years.
Oh, well, thank you for calling. And glad you've been listening for a long time. Do you have a comment or a question for Rob?
Yeah, tonight's guest. I wanted to ask him if he believes everything that we've been told from NASA about the Apollo projects and their missions, their goals, and if he believes also when we talk about visible structures on the moon, if he thinks that those are real.
I absolutely think we have been lied to by NASA and our government on numerous occasions. I'm not sure what the reasons were. I've seen direct evidence of it. There was a case of a shuttlecraft in orbit around Earth that had a female commander. I cannot think of her name. I was watching it live, and she's floating there and talking over the microphone, and she says, "Oh, there's that alien spacecraft again." Immediately, the sound cut out. She was still on screen, still floating around, and you could see she was still talking, but you couldn't hear her. They'd switched her to a private channel. So this goes on a lot. And yes, I think there are structures on the moon, and I think they have been deliberately hidden from us, excised from photos. We have quite a bit of evidence that a lot of the NASA photographs were retouched. Even on their own website, high-resolution photos were taken off shortly after they were put up, and low-resolution photos were put in their place. NASA says this was because of the consumption of memory the higher photographs took, which is ridiculous. NASA is a fairly well-off organization. It can afford a little extra memory for its website. But I think we get lied to all the time. I think there's obfuscation. I think we're being led by the nose, and we're being kept in the dark about a great many things, including UFOs.
It's great to hear you say that. I believe 100% of what you just said, and I don't understand the lying either. I mean, we're open society supposedly, but it's good to hear you say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Vince, thanks for the call.
You bet, Martin. Thanks.
All right. So anyway, the lines are open if anyone else wants to call. Again, that phone number is 855-472-5483. You're welcome to call in. So, yeah, I have heard that story before about the audio. I'm wondering.
Well, I mean, I actually saw it. I actually saw it when it happened. And, you know, I've gone online since then repeatedly to try to get that clip of that. I wanted to download it. It's gone. You can't find it anywhere. If you can, please let me know. I'd love to get a copy of that. But I watched it live and then tried to get it later, and it's just not there.
I wonder if anyone's ever tried to question the astronaut herself about that.
I haven't heard if they have. And other astronauts have come forth and talked about it, about different things. And they're convinced there's an alien civilization. Several of them saw UFOs before they ever went on these Apollo missions or into space at all. There have been sightings very recently in June of this year by the ISS, the International Space Station, of a large triangle. And I mean, we've got clear photographic evidence of it. And then NASA comes out with this obfuscation like your caller was just talking about, where they said, oh, it's probably the lights of a city on the Earth below in the background. Wrong direction for the Earth, number one. Number two, that was over outer Mongolia and Russia and Siberia, where there's no city, and also no city pattern of lights in that area or anywhere near there shows the same triangular pattern as these lights do. So again, we have some inane explanation for what they might be, but never the truth. Now, no one in there with any common sense would say, oh yeah, that was just a city on Earth. But they come up with the most outlandish reasons. One commercial pilot seeing UFOs, along with his co-pilot, navigator, and a flight attendant for 20 or 30 minutes, described it in detail. Ground control had it on their radar for a brief time. Another plane spotted it as well. And the government said, oh, it was probably a firefly trapped between the two panes of the windshield of the jet. Number one, at 38,000 feet, that little firefly would be frozen stiff. He wouldn't be moving and flying around. Number two, how would he have gotten in there? And number three, how could trained people on the plane not recognize it for what it was? And number four, why were they getting radar of it on the ground? So again, some of these explanations are just stupid.
I would say probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I contacted Alan Bean because he's the fourth man on the moon. And he was actually on another show that I do about antiques and fine art. He was an amazing painter. We lost him last year. He passed away. But I did contact him and said, I know you may think this is out there. I do a show now about UFOs. Would you be willing to talk about it? And he just wrote back, no.
There you go.
So he had the Skylab incident. I think it was 1973 or something like that, where they, him and I think 2 other people had quite a very unusual UFO sighting. And I think he personally did not want to talk about it because, he thought it would be not a good thing to do for his reputation or whatever. But I don't know if they're told not to speak of it. I mean, have you ever heard anyone say that?
They had a conference a few years back where they had a lot of pilots, military, and even a couple astronauts there. Some of the astronauts have come out and said they believe there are alien civilizations. One even said there definitely are aliens. Where they're from, we're not sure, but it must be from somewhere else in the solar system. Apollo 11 saw something tracking them as they were heading towards the moon. NASA said, oh, you're probably seeing your own booster. And they said, no, we see the booster. We know where that is. This is something entirely different. We don't know what it is. And it couldn't be ice crystals because it was too far away to be ice crystals. So whatever it was following them. And they said it. But yes, it's the third rail again. Their careers would have been over. Their legacies would have been destroyed. Government pressure must be incredible on people like that. I mean, the pilot of the Japanese airline jetliner over Alaska who saw a UFO, and another plane saw it too, and ground control had it on their radar for a while, and it plagued this plane for a long time. Well, he reported it, and he ended up at a desk job. Commercial pilots often are made to go through psychiatric evaluations if they want to report a UFO. I heard a live transcript of one and the actual recording, and he was reciting all this, not the Japanese pilot, an American pilot. And they finally said, would you like to report a UFO? And he goes, no, I don't want to report one of those.
Yeah. Hopefully that will change. I think, since the Navy has come out and said that they're going to actually have an open door for pilots to report UFOs, I think you're going to see more and more of associations and military fall in place with that.
Well, absolutely. And it has been leaking out. I mean, the government is schizophrenic. On the one hand, it closed Project Blue Book because there was no real evidence for UFOs and it was a waste of government money. And yet we find out they had a secret government program they pumped millions into, ATIP, which was to ascertain the threat of such things in our skies. Now, and that came out, not too long ago. So if they don't think there's any threat, why are they pumping millions into it to find out if there is a threat or if these objects, if they exist, are a threat? I think they know the objects exist, and I think they're just wondering if they are a danger. My evidence seems to show that not only do UFOs exist, but they are extremely dangerous and can be to individuals and to the government and to the world. I mean, when you have as many injuries and property damages and deaths, you can't call them our space brothers.
What in particular? I'm not familiar with. I've heard of 1 or 2 deaths that people are associating with UFO. One of them was a pilot that went up, probably, they said they may have gone too high, was chasing Venus or whatever they were saying he was doing. And
yes,
then
a trained pilot chasing Venus. Yeah, that
yeah.
rings so true to me.
And then there was the Australian incident. There's a couple of them where people have, gone missing. But when you're saying injuries, I'm not really familiar with that. Can you cite some of that?
Well, first with the deaths, it started in the early 50s with Lieutenant Robert Munkala, and he and his co-pilot intercepted a UFO that was on radar from the ground. The plane seemed to merge with the UFO, and that was it. They vanished without a trace. Never found any debris, any material, any bodies, nothing. They just vanished. And the UFO moved off towards Canada on the screen, entered Canadian airspace, and then vanished off their screen. And we don't know what happened to him. The Dyatlov Pass, orange orbs were seen in the sky at the time. All those skiers were killed in Russia, Soviet Union in the 50s. We have the case of the young pilot in Australia who reported a sighting, kept talking about the ground radar. You can get the transcripts anytime you want them. I have them. And he talks about these things buzzing him, getting close, and there's a strange noise. And he goes off screen or off the air. And we've never found his plane or him. We have found cases of people who've been near UFOs and gotten radiation burns in Indiana and Brazil. They died shortly later. We've had people all over the world having problems with radiation sickness, and also being paralyzed, being shot at. When in Brazil, said he was shot at by the aliens and paralyzed, and then later on they went into health deterioration, became like children, and then eventually died prematurely. In Texas, same thing. 3 people, 2 women and a boy were involved. They ended up going to the hospital that same night. They were sick. The doctors...
Cash Landrum?
Yep. And they couldn't do anything for them except try to get them better. And after that, the one suffered. They even sued the government and lost because they couldn't get enough proof that it was the government's fault. This goes on and on and on. Property damage in Australia, in America, in Europe, all over the place. Injuries, people being abducted, not to mention the permanently disappeared. In America alone, some 50, I estimated 50,000. The government, FBI, says 60,000 people disappear in this country every year that we can't account for. Actually, it's closer to 1 million, over 900,000 every year, but we can account for them. Murders, abductions, parents stealing the other child from the other parent, a child from the other parent, people being kidnapped, people being buried. Once you get rid of all of that, you're still left with about 50 to 60,000. I'm more conservative than the FBI. They say 60, I say 50. But they never show up again. They're never seen anywhere. They didn't start a new life. There's no sign of them. Australia, close to 30,000. So many people have disappeared in Alaska that I calculated was approximately 7% of the population of Alaska over about a 12-year period. And it's so extreme up there that they refer to it as the Alaskan Triangle. And this goes on in every country around the world. Add it all up, you're talking hundreds of thousands of permanently disappeared people every single year, unaccounted for, never seen again or heard from again.
So if you were calculating that, you already said that some of these are because of kidnapping and possibly murders or whatever.
Yes, but those are discounted.
If you were
numbers.
If you were to like softly say that the unknowns, part of that unknowns, would have to do with things that could just not be found out. But you'd still have a number. Even if there was an answer for all those missing people.
Well, you can't.
That's pretty huge.
You can't really do that. What you're basically saying is, even though the federal government has discounted all 95% of these disappearances as being murder, kidnapping, whatever, and then say, well, of the remaining, maybe a lot of those are too. It's like, no, they've accounted for that. Their conservative estimate is 60,000 who simply cannot be accounted for, and they don't think they were murdered. They don't think they started a new life. They don't think they were abducted. They don't think they were kidnapped. They can't account for how this happened. Any more than you can say that 95% of UFOs have been accounted for as something more mundane or possibly more mundane, but there's the 5% you simply cannot account for, and the evidence is so powerful that you have to assume it's a UFO. And again, if UFOs don't exist, then why is the government spending millions investigating them as a threat? So if the government's paying money to do that, they exist. The
All
proof
right.
of the pudding is in the eating.
Okay. Well, we have Ronald from Minnesota. Ronald, welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. How you doing? Thank you for your great guest. Thank you, Robert, for being a guest tonight.
Well, thank
I
you.
appreciate that. I watch an animated series called Futurama. I don't know if you've ever seen that. But,
I have, actually.
It's a kind of an adult animated series about a bunch of crazy characters that get into all kinds of trouble. And one of the things they talk about is they have a landing base inside the moon.
Right. And of course, they're stealing that from popular culture because, it's been ingrained in our culture now for a number of decades, actually.
Right. I'm trying a new feature here, Martin. Bill, producer Bill, told me about calling on Skype. I didn't know I could do that. I just learned tonight I could do that without having to use my cell phone. And I don't know how I sound. I guess it sounds all right.
Oh, it sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you
Very
for
clear.
having the opportunity. Yep. Thanks for having the opportunity to call. And thank you for the phone line. And I will be using this way a lot more.
Great.
That's about all. I just wanted to reference that cartoon and kind of still in it. And also, quick question about the Genesis account of the formation of the moon and how God created. Not that I want to get religious or anything, but just going to the Genesis account about how God created the greater light then in the daytime and the lesser light in the evening. These are historical records that are, of course, in Genesis, but in other writings as well. So how do you account for those writings, and what do you think on that perception of the creation of the moon or whatever, where it came from? I'll listen off the call, and I'll let someone else call in. Thank you.
All right, Ronald, thanks for the call.
And would you like me to answer that?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
not for me. Yeah.
Oh, okay. My answer would be, number one, there do seem to be different texts in the Bible that do seem to relate and seem to mirror the talk about Sitchin and his work done with cuneiform writings and the Sumerians, like the Watchers, for instance, the giants, all that sort of thing. Secondly, every culture has its creation theories and myths, and some of them are quite strange. The Japanese used to believe the earth was carried on the back of a giant turtle. None of us believe that today. We do denigrate and laugh at other people's history. We laugh at the Indians because of their Vedic texts and what they say was their history. So I don't laugh at any historical record of any sort. How accurate it is another matter. A lot of the Old Testament of the Bible was written at different points and from different perspectives. And so certain things were stressed and other things weren't. And for instance, the Jews were kept in captivity by the Babylonians for quite a while, and they absorbed a good deal of the Babylonian cultural myths, including Noah. The Babylonians had the idea of the Great Flood and Gilgamesh surviving on a raft, that sort of thing. And you find very much the same thing with Noah in the Bible. And then you have to remember that the Jewish people were in captivity in Babylon, and so they did absorb some of it. So how much is true, how much is hearsay, and how much is sheer myth and legend? Hard to say. But I have no problem looking into the Bible to try to find evidence for all of this. It is another resource after all, and an old one, so it should be valued as such.
Interesting. Wow. So we only have about 4 minutes left, and I promised you that you could talk about your latest book, The Mandela Effect. So I don't know if you can do something and wrap it in 4 minutes or not, but try to if you would.
Well, the Mandela Effect, everyone thinks is just false memories, people remembering things wrongly. Not so. Psychiatrists say it's false memories, but even they admit that they can't account for how many people and how many different cultures, races, civilizations around the world have these so-called false memories. Secondly, it isn't just false memories. There is actual physical evidence of contradictory information about our past timeline. For instance, the CIA, and you can get them online now, it's under the Freedom of Information Act, has conflicting accounts of the same event turning out two distinctly different ways in our history, recent history. Now, on top of that, there is evidence on maps and globes that these have changed. there is a landmass off of Australia in the movie Dazed and Confused on a globe in a schoolroom that they use, and it was filmed on location with a real school globe. There is no landmass to the west of Australia. Friends shows a landmass to the southwest of Australia. It's not Tasmania. It shows that too. But there's an island to the southwest. It's not there. I looked it up and did some research and found a globe in I Dream of Jeannie used in the 4th season that shows a landmass to the west of Australia, as well as a large island to the southwest of South America and a large landmass in the Pacific, roughly parallel with the Central America. And we have all the disappearing islands like Sandy Hook in the South Pacific, just disappeared 3 years ago. You have High Brazil, which was on maps for years, disappeared. And of course, you can even think about Atlantis if you want to. So and also Ford's insignia has changed. They said it's been the same forever. It hasn't been. We have found old cars in junkyards that show the old insignia on the back of the car and the new insignia on the front. I call it new. They insist it's been there since 1912. There was a medallion struck for a World's Fair. It shows Ford without that little curlicue on the F. And then there's another medallion from the same fair that doesn't show it. And Ford's adamant they only had the one struck for that fair, not two different versions. This goes on and on all over the place. People get things wrong, and they get it wrong all the same way, like the color chartreuse. What color is chartreuse, Martin?
I couldn't even guess.
Okay, most people, not most people, but half people say it's lime green, which in my timeline it is. The other half get it wrong and say it's red, reddish purple, maroon. They don't say it's blue. They don't say it's orange. They don't say it's yellow. They all get it wrong. False memory, fine. But they all get it wrong the same way. Why?
Well, there's a very good point about that with the dress or something that went online that some people saw one color. I mean, it was a big divide. People were...
Absolutely.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, and I do remember that. Yes, and I did see it as one color, and a friend saw it as another. This is a little different. This is stuff we remembered all our lives as being true, but now no longer seems to be true. Luke, I am your father from Star Wars. He never said it. Even the actor who portrayed Darth Vader says that's what he said in 2 separate interviews. But if you watch the movie now, it doesn't say, Luke, I am your father. It says, no, I am your father. Life is like a box of chocolates from Forrest Gump. It doesn't say that. Now it says life was like a box of chocolates. This goes on and on with almost everything and anything. But ignore the memories. Just go with the physical evidence, the medallions, the coins. Coin was found in Mexico. It says Nueva Alemania, meaning New Germany. And the date stamped on it is 2039. And it's very hard to read because it's a very old coin. It was found in a construction site in Mexico City. Again, this goes on and on and on. How do we explain all these? How do I explain globes and maps that show land masses that have never existed in our timeline? How do we explain maps that show islands that have now vanished, but were on our maps for up to 4 or 5 centuries?
We are out of time, I'm sorry to say. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a fun show, very interesting.
Oh, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much, and I hope your audience did as well.
All right. Take care now.
You have a good night.
You too. Okay, everyone, we are plumb out of time. I'm sorry to cut this so short, but we'll be back next week with Dan Wright about CIA UFO papers. Thanks so much for listening, everyone, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.